One summer moment can change a child's life. Through Toys for Tots Give and Go initiative, your support provides books, games, toys, and outdoor adventures that spark curiosity, creativity, and a love of nature. Whether it's fishing, learning a new sport, reading under a tree, or playing with friends, these moments build confidence and lifelong memories. For too many children, those moments never come. You can help change that this summer. Visit toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots, delivering hope beyond the holidays.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Taxi!
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone as we prepare for Independence Day. If you're not following Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, well, you really should. Anna Paulina Luna is putting Washington on notice. She says no more business as usual until election integrity is treated like a national priority. The Florida Congresswoman says she will oppose House rules needed to advance legislation unless President Trump's Save America Act moves forward in the Senate. The bill, of course, would require voters to prove U.S. citizenship before casting a ballot, a basic safeguard that over 90% of Americans call common sense. In a forceful post on X, Luna blasted Senate leadership as feckless for failing to pass the measure as America approaches its 250th birthday. She's also called out members of her own chamber who, in her view, are more worried about making senators uncomfortable than keeping campaign promises they made to the voters. Anna Paulina Luna's message was blunt. She doesn't work for Washington. She works for the American people. She said the House must force the Senate to do its job, saying that failure is not an option. Anna Paulina Luna is both feisty and a fighter. The Save America Act has already passed the House multiple times, but Senate Republicans say it lacks the votes needed to clear the 60-vote threshold. That's what's required under the filibuster rules. In other words, we believe that there are 50 votes for the bill in the Senate. With Vice President J.D. Vance breaking the tie, it would become law. But without 60 votes, the Republican leadership will not move the bill. Some Republicans, of course, are criticizing Luna's hardball tactics. Congressman Don Bacon, rhino extraordinaire, not running for re-election, called Luna's plan dumb. But Luna's argument is simple. Republicans ran on secure elections, and now it's time to deliver. At a moment when citizens are demanding confidence in the ballot box, requiring proof of citizenship to vote should not be the slightest bit controversial. It should, in fact, be the bare minimum. Meanwhile, the Trump Justice Department is drawing a hard line in defense of American sovereignty. In a June 29th letter to International Criminal Court Judge Tomoko Akane, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche warned that the International Criminal Court has no legal authority over American citizens, and the United States will refuse to cooperate with any investigation, proceeding, summons, or arrest request involving U.S. people. Blanche made the controversial constitutional case plainly. America never ratified the Rome Statute. The treaty has treated the ICC. That means the court cannot impose its authority on the United States, its troops, its officials, or its citizens. The International Criminal Court has no jurisdictions over U.S. citizens anywhere in the world, Blanche wrote, calling an attempt to claim such power illegitimate, unlawful, and a direct affront to U.S. sovereignty. The Justice Department also cited the American Service Members Protection Act of 2002, which rejects the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over Americans and authorizes the president to use all necessary measures to free any American detained under an ICC warrant. The warning comes as the Hague-based court faces mounting criticism over selective enforcement, internal misconduct allegations, and actions targeting Israel and other non-member nations. Blanche also pointed to President Trump's February 2025 executive order sanctioning the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutors after moves against Israeli officials. The message from Washington is unmistakable. American liberty will not be outsourced to some unelected foreign judges. The Constitution vests judicial power in American courts, not a tribunal in The Hague. Under President Donald Trump, the United States is once again putting sovereignty first and is refusing to be bossed around by globalists. Meanwhile, it looks to me like the front runner for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2028 is in deep kimchi, as they say. A widening FBI corruption probe in California is putting Governor Gavin Newsom's political world under new scrutiny, according to attorney McGregor Scott, who represents former California Chief of Staff Dana Williamson. Democratic operative Alexis Podesta cooperated with federal investigators and secretly recorded conversations as part of that investigation. Scott has told reporters Alexis wore a wire and Dana did not. Williamson pleaded guilty in May to conspiracy to commit bank and wire fraud, filing a false tax return and making false statements to a bank, as well as the FBI. Federal prosecutors say she helped divert roughly $225,000 from a dormant campaign account linked to former Biden Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra, now the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for governor, with payments allegedly disguised as consulting fees. This revelation may explain why numerous Sacramento politicians and lobbyists received FBI notices last fall saying their phone calls had been intercepted. Republican Assemblyman Josh Hoover said he was among those notified, suggesting that federal investigators are casting a broad bipartisan net across the Capitol community. The probe has now drawn in Newsom, his wife, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, and members of his inner circle. A source familiar with the matter said that told Semaphore that there are several ongoing investigations relating to Newsom, reportedly focusing on his wife's taxes and his chief of staff, as well as involving whistleblowers from Sacramento. Newsom, predictably, of course, is blaming President Donald Trump and calling himself a political target. But California voters deserve facts, not deflection. When federal investigators, whistleblowers, guilty pleas, and secret recordings all point towards Sacramento's Democratic power structure, the public has every right to demand transparency, accountability, and equal justice under the law. And of course, this all begins at the top. It's very clear to me that Newsom is dirty and he must be held accountable for his nefarious behavior. Meanwhile, the Trump Justice Department is taking California to court over what it calls unconstitutional attacks on the Second Amendment. On July 1st, the Department of Justice sued the state over its ban on so-called machine gun convertible pistols and California's restrictive handgun roster, which limits which firearms law-abiding citizens are allowed to buy. The new California law, signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, targets Glock-style semi-automatic pistols that officials claim can be converted with illegal Glock switches. But those switches are already banned under federal law, as well as being banned in dozens of states. The Justice Department argues that California is using criminal misuse as an excuse to block lawful citizens from purchasing common handguns to which they're entitled under the Second Amendment. The lawsuit also challenges California's handgun roster, which requires features such as chamber load indicators and magazine disconnect mechanisms, and so on. Until recently, the roster also required micro-stamping technology, a mandate so burdensome that according to the lawsuit, no new handguns were added between 2013 and 2023. Newsom defended the laws, calling them common-sense gun safety measures, but many Americans see the familiar California playbook. Punish responsible gun owners while criminals ignore the laws and have access to any guns they need or want. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, she's a hero to me, said the Civil Rights Division will defend law-abiding citizens from states that seek to disarm them illegally. The Supreme Court has made clear that Americans have an individual right to keep and bear arms for self-defense. The Department of Justice's message to California under Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is clear and simple. Constitutional rights do not disappear at the state line, and Sacramento cannot regulate the Second Amendment out of existence. Meanwhile, here's no surprise. Jill Biden's new memoir, View from the East Wing, debuted to number 1 on the New York Times hardcover nonfiction bestseller list on June 21st. But there's a major question behind that headline. How much of that success came from real reader demand? When the book appeared on the list, it carried the Times dagger symbol, which is a marker used when retailers report bulk purchases mixed in with regular sales. So in plain English, the paper saw signs that the numbers may have been boosted by large volume buying, not just by actual individual Americans lining up to buy the book. And the momentum did not last. The book fell to number 3 the following week, then disappeared from the Times list altogether. Circana Book Scan showed a similar slide, with the memoir dropping from number 2 to number 5 to number 16 in its hardcore fiction chart. Now, my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, was also on the New York Times list, but it was 15th out of 15. I'm happy to say it even made the list, but there were no bulk sales. That doesn't seem to be the case here. By the end of the week of June 20th, it had sold just 3,221 print copies that week, with total U.S. print sales under 30,000. Publishing experts note that bulk sales can be legitimate, especially around book tours and events, but plenty of authors tour without getting flagged by the Times. The bigger issue here is credibility. Bestseller lists are supposed to reflect genuine public interest, not the ability of political networks, campaigns, donors, or wealthy institutions to buy stacks of books and manufacture momentum that is not there. For the Biden brand, a weak showing would be embarrassing. So, when Joe Biden's memoirs rockets to number 1 with a warning label attached, then quickly fades, I think Americans are right to ask whether there was popularity or whether this was some kind of political stagecraft. Meanwhile, disgraced former special counsel Jack Smith is back in front of the friendly cameras, this time complaining that the Trump Justice Department can no longer be trusted to represent the American people in court. This is almost laughable. Speaking with MSNOW's Nicole Wallace, Smith claimed the department had lost credibility with judges and accused the administration of pursuing retribution prosecutions. He argued that prosecutors no longer effective, that expertise has been pushed out, and that the national security is being weakened. But a lot of Americans see this very differently. Jack Smith, the man who ran an unprecedented extra-constitutional prosecution against President Donald Trump, now whining because the Justice Department is no longer operating as a political weapon for the left. Smith pointed to fired FBI Director Brian Driscoll and calling him a folk hero, praising him for refusing to turn over information related to agents who worked on the January 6 cases. Yes, Driscoll refused to turn over the list of plainclothes FBI agents who were planted in the audience as provocateurs. So, for millions of Americans, the real issue is not whether insiders protect one another. It's whether the federal government is finally being forced to answer for years of politicized investigations, selective enforcement, and abuses of power. Smith's sudden concern that trust rings hollow is a joke. This is the same Washington legal class that asked Americans to accept endless investigations of Trump while dismissing many concerns of Americans as conspiracy theories. Now the tables are turning. Jack Smith sounds less like a guardian of justice and more like a whiny crybaby watching his own playbook get exposed. And if real accountability comes to Washington, Smith may be in prison for the rest of his life, or perhaps more appropriately, well, we know what the penalty is for treason. It's interesting. Smith talks as if a federal judge did not determine that he had been unlawfully appointed by a special counsel, or that same judge busted his team for misrepresenting the conditions of materials they seized on the illegal raid on Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, or how Judge Eileen Cannon kicked one of his henchmen out of court one day over his disrespectful temper tantrum, or how she constantly pressed his team as to why they conducted their entire investigation in front of a D.C. grand jury and then allowed a Florida grand jury to read those transcripts in order to seek their indictments of Trump and his associates, or why Jack Smith and D.C. Judge Jeb Boasberg refused to produce grand jury transcripts from that investigation to her, a federal judge. As far as Brian Driscoll is concerned, the so-called folk hero, that's really hilarious. Driscoll was fired for refusing direct orders to produce a list of FBI employees who involved undercover in the investigations of January 6th. The whining by those on the radical left is really laughable. What you have here is a clear case of people who broke the law and the Constitution in their manic effort to destroy Donald Trump being held responsible. And when they're held responsible, they claim they're being victimized. They claim they're being targeted. They're claiming it is retaliation, when all it really is justice and accountability. I'm Roger Stone. We're warming up here for Independence Day. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away because we'll be right back.